In the quiet town of Westfield, New Jersey, stood an old but beautiful house at 657 Boulevard. It was the kind of home people dreamed of. A large colonial-style residence with a deep front porch, elegant windows, and a manicured lawn framed by tall, whispering trees. The neighborhood was peaceful, filled with families who waved to each other and children who played in the streets. When Derek and Maria Broaddus bought the house, it felt like the final step toward the life they had always wanted. They imagined birthdays in the backyard, summer evenings on the porch, and a fresh start in a safe, friendly community. Just days after closing the deal, Derek stopped by the new house one evening to check the mail. The box was nearly empty except for a single white envelope, thick and neatly sealed. The handwriting on the front was unusual, smooth, deliberate, and strangely old-fashioned. It was addressed simply, to the new owners of 657 Boulevard. There was no name or return address. Curious, Derek opened it. What he read inside made his hands tremble. "Dearest new neighbor," the letter began, "allow me to welcome you to 657 Boulevard. I've been watching this house for years, waiting for its next family to come. It is my duty to observe and protect it." The message grew darker with every line. The writer called themselves the Watcher and wrote as if they had a personal connection to the property. They claimed to have been tasked with watching the house by their ancestors, who had done so before them. The letter mentioned the house's rooms, the style of the renovations, and even asked about the couple's children, describing them as young blood. It was as if someone had been studying the family from the moment they stepped onto the porch. Derek's heart pounded as he read the final line. "Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? I am waiting to find out." At first he thought it might be a cruel joke, a prank from a nosy neighbor or a teenager trying to scare the newcomers. But when Maria read the letter, her face went pale. Something about the tone felt too controlled, too specific to dismiss as harmless. They decided to keep it quiet, at least until they knew what was going on. Days later, another letter arrived. This one was angrier, more invasive. The Watcher wrote about the house as if it belonged to them, mentioning changes they disapproved of and warning that the family was disturbing the spirit of 657 Boulevard. The letters came without fingerprints, postmarked from nearby towns but impossible to trace. Each new delivery deepened the unease. Derek began noticing shadows near the yard at night, faint movements that vanished when he looked directly at them. Maria said she sometimes felt watched from the upstairs windows. What had once been their dream home now seemed alive with a quiet, suffocating dread. The house that once represented hope now pulsed with fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a light became a reminder that someone, somewhere was watching, someone who knew their names, their habits, and their every move. The unease within 657 Boulevard deepened as days turned into weeks. The Broaddus family tried to convince themselves that the letters were nothing more than a disturbing prank. But strange events inside the house began to blur the line between paranoia and reality. It started subtly, lights flickering in empty rooms, doors that were carefully locked at night found slightly open by morning, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway when no one else was home. At first they blamed faulty wiring or an old house settling, but the sense of being watched grew stronger each day. Maria noticed that items seemed to move on their own. A vase that once sat on the dining table would appear on the counter, photographs tilted at odd angles, and small things like keys or jewelry would vanish, only to reappear in completely different places. The air inside the home felt heavy, like it carried something unseen. Even in daylight, the rooms felt colder than before, and the creaks in the floorboards seemed to whisper warnings. Then another letter arrived. This one was longer, more personal. The Watcher described the children's appearances and mentioned which windows they had been seen standing near. The letter spoke about the layout of the house in unnerving detail, what furniture had been moved, what rooms were painted, and even which lights stayed on late into the night. The writer's words were steady and deliberate, never rushed or emotional. "You have changed my house," the letter said. "I see it all. I know your patterns. I am learning about you, as I did with the others." The family contacted the police, but the investigation yielded nothing. There were no fingerprints on the letters, and the envelopes had been postmarked from a nearby postal facility that served multiple towns. Cameras placed around the house captured no suspicious activity. The watcher seemed to know when and how to stay hidden. Each letter arrived as if it had passed through invisible hands. Neighbors began to whisper, each offering their own version of events. Some said the house was cursed, haunted by someone who had once lived there. Others believed it was an obsessed local, someone with a strange fascination for the house's long history. The more the Broaddus's learned about 657 Boulevard, the darker the story became. Records showed that the home had been owned by several families over the decades, some of whom left abruptly, never explaining why. Late at night, Derek would stand by the window, staring at the dark shapes of neighboring houses. Any of them could be hiding the watcher. He began to recognize how exposed their home really was. Large windows visible from multiple angles, open yards that offered a clear line of sight from the street. It felt like living inside a glass box, constantly observed by unseen eyes. The letters continued, each one colder than the last. The watcher wrote of generations who had watched over 657 Boulevard, claiming that it was not simply a house, but a living thing, something that demanded respect and loyalty. "The house is waiting," one line read. "It knows who belongs here and who does not." Fear slowly began to replace any sense of comfort. The Broaddus family stopped inviting guests, avoided certain rooms, and spoke in whispers, as if the walls themselves could hear. The silence inside 657 Boulevard grew thicker, pressing against them like the weight of something unseen, something ancient, patient and always watching. As word of the mysterious letters spread, the quiet charm of Westfield began to unravel. What had once been a peaceful neighborhood lined with friendly faces and manicured lawns now felt like a stage for suspicion and fear. Reporters started parking outside 657 Boulevard, snapping photos and asking invasive questions. News vans became a daily sight, and curious onlookers slowed their cars to catch a glimpse of the house that had become the center of America's strangest unsolved mystery. The Broaddus family tried to stay calm, but the pressure was unbearable. Every glance from a neighbor, every unexpected sound outside felt like a threat. They no longer saw a community, they saw suspects. Derek began keeping notes on everyone nearby, who came and went, whose lights stayed on late, who seemed to watch the house from their windows. Maria avoided going outside unless absolutely necessary. Even the children sensed something was wrong, asking why people were taking pictures of their home. The police reopened their investigation, this time with more intensity. They questioned neighbors and collected handwriting samples from anyone who might have had a grudge or a reason to target the family. A particular couple caught their attention, a pair who had lived next door for decades and were known for their obsession with the neighborhood's history. They had mentioned the house's past before, calling it special and important. But when questioned, they denied any connection to the letters. The evidence wasn't enough to move forward. Private investigators were hired next. They ran background checks, examined property records, and even monitored the area with hidden cameras. One theory suggested that the watcher was someone nearby, someone who could see the house clearly and observe small details. Investigators noted that several houses on the street had perfect views of 657 Boulevard's windows, but even after weeks of surveillance, no suspicious activity was captured. Whoever the watcher was, they were patient, precise, and careful. As the investigation dragged on, the family's fear turned to exhaustion. The stress of living under constant watch began to erode their sanity. At night, Maria sometimes heard faint tapping on the walls, though no source was ever found. Derek felt his chest tighten every time he approached the mailbox, afraid of finding another letter. When one finally arrived, it contained just a few lines, but those lines were enough to freeze them in terror. "You worry about finding me," the letter read, "but you should worry about the house. It does not want you." Unable to bear it any longer, the family moved out temporarily, staying with relatives while trying to decide their next step. Even from afar, they couldn't escape the weight of the mystery. New tenants who moved in later didn't last long. Some claimed to hear strange noises, while others reported receiving cryptic notes. Each time someone tried to make 657 Boulevard their home, the watcher seemed to reappear, as if bound to the house itself. Westfield's friendly image was gone. Neighbors turned cold, conversations grew cautious, and trust became rare. People who once gathered for barbecues now avoided eye contact. The watcher's presence, though unseen, had infected the entire neighborhood with fear. It wasn't just the Broaddus family who felt watched anymore. It was everyone. The quiet streets of Westfield would never feel safe again. Over time, the story of 657 Boulevard spread beyond Westfield and captured the attention of the entire nation. Newspapers printed headlines calling it the Watcher House Mystery, and television segments replayed the strange details that no one could explain. Online communities erupted with theories, each trying to solve what the police could not. Some people treated it like a ghost story, others like a complex criminal case. But for the Broaddus family, it was neither entertainment nor legend. It was a wound that refused to close. Investigators tried to dig deeper into the history of the house. Records showed it was built in 1905 and had passed through several families over the years. One owner had stayed for decades and abruptly moved away without explanation. Another had sold it quickly after a series of uncomfortable incidents. It seemed the house had a strange energy attached to it, something that followed whoever tried to call it home. Local archives contained fragments of gossip, rumors of hidden tunnels, secret rooms, and even a caretaker who once lived in the basement and vanished without a trace. None of these could be confirmed, but they added layers to the unease surrounding the house. The watcher's letters continued to arrive at unpredictable intervals. Sometimes months would pass without a word, and just as the family began to relax, another envelope would appear. The handwriting never changed. The tone shifted from hostile to almost poetic, filled with odd admiration for the house itself. 657 Boulevard is alive, one letter said. It breathes through its walls and remembers those who love it. You are strangers. You disturb its peace. The writer seemed less interested in the people living there and more obsessed with protecting the property as if it were a sacred place. Theories spread like wildfire. Some thought it was a former owner unable to let go. Others suggested it was a neighbor using the letters as revenge for losing a bid on the home. A few believed the Broadduses had fabricated the story for attention or to escape financial trouble, but the family's fear and isolation made that explanation hard to accept. They had lost money, peace, and privacy. There was nothing to gain from a lie. The FBI was briefly consulted, but without physical evidence or digital traces, even they found no lead to follow. The watcher seemed to exist outside of logic, operating in the shadows with precision and patience. Handwriting experts compared samples across databases, but no match was ever found. Every clue led to silence. As the years passed, the fear turned into obsession for many. True crime enthusiasts visited Westfield, standing in front of the house to take photos or record videos. Some claimed to feel a strange sensation near the property, as if the air itself was charged with something unseen. Others swore they saw a figure watching from an upstairs window at night, though no one could prove it. The watcher's legacy had grown larger than life, but beneath all the noise, one truth remained. Someone had known too much about that house and the people inside it. Whether they were still watching or had simply vanished into the crowd, no one could tell. The letters stopped, but the silence that followed felt even more haunting. It was as if the watcher had gotten exactly what they wanted, their house left alone, feared, and forever marked by their unseen presence. Years passed, but the shadow of 657 Boulevard never faded. The Broaddus family, worn down by fear and exhaustion, finally decided to sell the house. It had become a symbol of their suffering, a place that once promised a future but instead brought them sleepless nights and endless anxiety. Selling it wasn't easy. Potential buyers were frightened off as soon as they learned about the letters. The story had spread too far. Everyone in Westfield, and even across the country, knew about the Watcher House. When a buyer finally agreed to take it, the family sold it at a significant loss just to move on. The new owners were quiet, avoiding the media and refusing to speak about the Watcher. For a while there was a tense calm. Months went by without reports of new letters, and people began to hope that the nightmare was finally over. Some believed that whoever had been behind the letters must have lost interest once the Broadduses left. Others thought the Watcher was someone tied specifically to that family, a stalker who had moved on to other victims. But there were whispers that even the new owners occasionally received strange unsigned notes. None were ever shown publicly, and no one could confirm if they were real. The house itself became a legend. True crime enthusiasts drove through the quiet streets of Westfield. stopping to take photos or record short videos of the infamous address. Locals grew tired of the attention. They closed their blinds tighter at night and warned strangers to stay away. Yet the Watcher's story refused to fade. It became part of American folklore, the kind of mystery that people told around campfires or featured in late-night documentaries. Even after moving away, Derek and Maria couldn't escape the memory of those letters. Sometimes Derek would wake in the middle of the night, certain that someone was outside watching. Maria admitted that she avoided checking the mail for years, afraid of what she might find. The sense of being observed had taken root in their lives. No matter where they went, they carried that feeling, the heavy, invisible gaze that had followed them in Westfield. As investigators reviewed the case in later years, they realized how perfectly the Watcher had executed their plan. No fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance footage, and no direct threats that could justify an arrest. Whoever wrote those letters had studied human fear with precision. They knew exactly how to plant a seed of paranoia and let it grow until it consumed everything. It wasn't just a crime, it was psychological warfare. The identity of the Watcher was never discovered. Some people believed it was an older neighbor who died without ever being caught. Others thought it might have been a family member of a former owner, someone obsessed with protecting the property's legacy. There were even theories that the house itself somehow inspired the letters, as if it held a strange energy that compelled people to act in its defense. None of these explanations brought closure. Today, 657 Boulevard still stands as it always has, calm, beautiful, and silent. Its porch is swept clean, the garden trimmed, and the windows gleam in the sunlight. But those who pass by say the air around it feels different, heavier somehow, like the house remembers everything that happened. At night, when the street is empty and the wind rustles through the trees, some swear they feel eyes on them, cold and patient, watching from behind the glass. The mystery of the Watcher remains unsolved, and the question still lingers in every dark corner of the house. Was the Watcher ever truly gone? Or have they been there all along, waiting for the next family to arrive?